I particularly wanted to show solidarity, really, and deep concern for what so many of the Eastern Christian churches are going through in the Middle East. I mean, what can I do except try to show concern and sympathy and understanding? And I just felt that one way to do that, because I know that so many of them, having been to visit their congregations, have members of those congregations where their families are still out in Iraq or Syria or wherever, and are either being persecuted or killed or in some awful way badly treated, to say the least, driven out of their homes. And I just felt that it was very important to show that sympathy with them, but also in a way that might draw some more attention to their plight, which is so utterly appalling when you think how long Christians have been in the Middle East, and that Christianity, of course, was founded in the Middle East, which we often forget.
Are you worried, or are you concerned that there will come a time where there are absolutely no Christians in the Middle East?
I think there is a real worry, yes, because the numbers have gone so dramatically down. And now, with what has happened in Mosul and other centres where there were a lot of Christians, there's very few left. Of course, you can imagine, because they were intimidated to a degree you can't believe. Everything taken from them, their houses taken over, marked with an N. That's what's so frightening. Nazarene, whatever it is. And I know from talking to these congregations that, of course, many of them are so fearful now of ever going back. So you can imagine, will it happen again? How do we ensure? So if you're Eastern Christian and Syrian Orthodox or Chaldean Roman Catholic, what do you do? It's the most agonizing situation. But then, again, I suppose we must remember that all around the world there's appalling persecution going on. Not of Christians, but of Muslims or of other faiths and religions and other minorities. And I suppose we have to try and remember that we have to balance that. But at the same time, I fear that the problems in the Middle East are not going to go away immediately. And so there is a danger that there will be very, very few left.
What about here? We are seeing increasingly so many young people becoming radicalised. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, of course, this is one of the greatest worries, I think, and I think the extent to which this has happened is the alarming part. Particularly in a country like ours, where, the values we hold dear, you would think that people who've come here and born here, go to school here, would imbibe those values and outlooks. But the frightening part is that people can be so radicalized either through contact with somebody else or through the internet. And the extraordinary amount of crazy stuff which is on that internet. Clearly, some people seem to get particularly affected by it, and then I suppose they get into groups of others who... And I can see, I suppose, to a certain extent, some aspect of this radicalization is a search for adventure and excitement at a particular age. So what I've been trying to do all these years, with the Prince's Trust and so on, is to find alternatives for adolescents and people at a young age, constructive paths for to channel their enthusiasm, their energy, their sense of wanting to take risks and adventure and aggression and all these things. But you have to channel them into constructive paths.
And that sense of worth is really important.
Well, exactly. And I don't know if you know, but I started something in 2007 called Mosaic, which was designed to try and help young people in Muslim areas, particularly deprived areas in the UK, with extra mentoring in order to help build their self-esteem and self-confidence. It's all based on that, really, as with the Prince's Trust.
Totally agree.
And to help them to raise their aspirations and achieve all sorts of things. So I recruited a whole mass of Muslim people in this country, from the British Asian community and everybody, to come and help. And these are usually very successful, professional young Muslims and businessmen and lawyers and goodness knows what else, and bankers and so on. They all come and have been fantastic in going out and helping with the mentoring aspect. And it's attracted a lot of attention in the Islamic world as well, Mosaic. So we now have it in Jordan and elsewhere around the world. And this at least is one attempt, to try and help the situation. So I've been asking them recently, we must try and do more in the whole effort towards de-radicalization. And there are some very interesting examples of how people can be de-radicalized once they become radicalized. Yeah. Because I think sometimes they find that they're horrified by what it leads to. Of course, how do you prevent it in the first place is the great challenge. And that's what I think more and more people now are beginning to realize they have to address. You can't just sweep it under the carpet.
But I mean, I'm inspired and encouraged by preventing and actually finding an avenue to turn young people away who probably have got into this without even realising where they were going.
But I think the most important thing is to remind people of the distortions of great religions and of the original ideas, the original inspiration of the founders of these religions. So often you find that their message is so distorted by their putative followers. That's the tragedy. And of course, the traditional Islam does not permit this sort of thing. That's what we have to remember.
Recently, Christian Magazine described you as faith's defender. In fact, you've described yourself as a defender of faith. How does your own faith...
No, I didn't describe myself as defender. I said I would rather be seen as defender of faith all those years ago. Because, as I tried to describe, I mind about the inclusion of other people's faiths and their freedom to worship in this country. And it's always seemed to me that while at the same time being defender of the faith, you can also be protector of faiths. And from that point of view, it was very interesting that 20 years or more after I mentioned this, which has been frequently misinterpreted, the Queen in her Jubilee address, in her address to the faith leaders, at the time of the Jubilee, and she said that as far as the role of the Church of England is concerned, it is not to defend Anglicanism to the exclusion of other religions. Instead, the Church has a duty to protect the free practice of all faiths in this country. I think in that sense, she was confirming what I was really trying to say, perhaps not very well, all those years ago.
How does your own faith, which I know is very strong, how does your own faith motivate your passion to build bridges between all these various faiths?
Well, it does. It informs the way I look at it. And of course, I find it fascinating finding out more about each person's different faith. It is riveting. I hope to find those ways in which you can build bridges. And of course, I always think when it comes to interfaith relations and Christian-Muslim relations, it's quite important to remember that when the Prophet himself migrated from Mecca to Medina, all those years ago, he was actually seeking the freedom to worship. And so this love of religious freedom is fundamental, and it allowed people of other faiths to worship freely in the lands that were ruled by Muslims. And sometimes that's forgotten, that he himself had to move. And that's where I think the more you read, the more you discover about other people's faiths, the more you begin to understand how interpretations can differ. And as I say, the distortions are the things that very often lead to misunderstanding and misinterpretation. So what I want to do is try in my small way to heal those divisions.